Hello everyone, welcome to today's session. We are Indian startups. We are a strong community of more than 90,000 members, and you guys make that community a stronger one. So our today's session is on legal due diligence. And just to before we jump into the startup, I just want to give you just a little brief about what India startup is and what we intend to do. So we are trying to bring together the whole entrepreneurship ecosystem, the global entrepreneurship ecosystem together. And in order to do that, we are hosting webinars, trainings for entrepreneurs and helping them at each and every important step of your startup journey. So today we have with us Sanjana Srivastava. She's a senior associate with Samvad Partners, and she's been experienced in different verticals of like managing a startup. She takes care of the intellectual property, the different technology laws, and different employment laws that startup should adhere to. And so it's over to you, Sanjana. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, hi everyone. Good evening. It's a pleasure to connect with all of you. Thank you so much for the introduction, Jatin. Like Jatin said, I'm a senior resource with Samvad Partners, a pan-India multi-service law firm. I predominantly deal with corporate commercial laws and also have experience with IP, tech, and employment law. I basically work with several promoters and investors on their fundraising documentation as well as assisting them with legal documentation and compliance. That's a little bit about me. Can we have the presentation?
Yes, Sanjana, sure.
Yeah. So, first slide. So the first important step is to understand what is a legal diligence, why are we doing it, and how are we doing it. So what is a legal due diligence? First of all, we need to understand that a due diligence is an investigation or an inquiry into a company's affairs to basically check how compliant a company is with respect to applicable laws as well as with basically good corporate governance methods. So a diligence can be either business, financial, legal, etc. For the purpose of the session today, we will be dealing only with legal due diligence, right? While undergoing, if you're a promoter who's undergoing a legal due diligence or you're an investor who's basically looking to, conduct a legal due diligence on a company, can we go back to the earlier slide? Yeah. The first step is to basically understand what is the company's business, what is the scope of review. Does your company have a subsidiary? If you're a promoter and an investor wants to conduct a legal due diligence on your entity, do you want the investor also to conduct the due diligence on your affiliate? Is that required? Because it is very important to know that as a promoter, it's very important for you because there are associated costs. Almost in every transaction, you would see that while the investor is conducting the due diligence, it is ultimately the company who reimburses the investor for conducting the due diligence. So therefore, you should always be very clear about which entity the due diligence is being conducted for, right? There's some. Okay, so one is the who's already received investment and you're looking at another round, right? You don't want your investor to basically conduct a due diligence all over again when already there would have been an existing due diligence report. In those cases, you should typically ask your investor that, please do only a top-up duty because I already have an existing report in hand and I would like only the portion of time for which the report does not cover. I only want a legal due diligence for that period of time. This will help you save time in terms of closing your investment. This will also help you save cost. So it's very important to understand the mechanics of why are you doing the duty, how long, what is the tenure of the period for which the legal due diligence is being carried forward, and whether it is limited by time, and also on the entities on which the due diligence is happening, right? Secondly, again, very importantly, both from an investor perspective as well as from a promoter perspective. Promoters are basically nothing but the founders and entrepreneurs like any one of you could be. a long form report versus an issue based report. Now, typically, when we say legal due diligence, the assumption is always that it's going to be a very, very long, report with too much of legal language there and too much of information points there, some of which may not even be relevant. See, ultimately, as an investor, you always want to know what is wrong with the company, what is the key risk, what are the liabilities of the company. And as a promoter, even you would want to be apprised of the same. Therefore, the mode nowadays with which the law firms are going, as well as even individual legal practitioners are going, is that everyone prefers something what we call as an issue based report. An issue based report is basically not where your lawyer will tell you what all documents they have seen. Your lawyer will basically tell you, this is a non-compliance, I'm highlighting the non-compliance, this is the associated liability, monetary or otherwise, with the non-compliance. There is no question of going into, these are the various documents the company has given me, this is what I have seen. We don't capture all of that anymore, simply because, one, it takes too much time, which leads to an increased added cost for the promoters who have to pay for the legal due diligence. Two, the investors never concerned with that kind of information. So at the fundamental, it's very important to understand what kind of a report you want in place. One other point I would like to highlight is, please don't think that it is only an investor who conducts a legal due diligence. There have been a lot of companies who have actually conducted their own legal due diligence for two reasons. It's this type of legal due diligence which the company conducts is something what you call as a vendor legal due diligence. Why do you conduct that? The reason you conduct that is twofold. One is so that, your investment is not delayed. When your investor comes and says, I need to do my own due diligence, you can always say, hey, no worries, I've already finished it and this is the report. You can have your legal counsel check the report, but this is what, off late, 1 or 2 months back, I've already gotten my legal practitioner to do it. That's one. In most cases, your investor may oblige if your report is hardly 1 or 2 months prior to the date of investment. The other case is also, as a promoter, you may want to know what is wrong with the company before an investor comes and tells you the non-compliances, so that you are adequately prepared to address it. Now, this can basically be a compliance report which a legal practitioner can give you, basically to tell you that, hey, listen, these are certain non-compliances. When your investor talks to you about them, this is how we may have to negotiate. This is how we may have to address it. And, this is how, let's try and rectify it before the investor starts his own legal due diligence, so that your documentation process becomes very easy. So can we move on to the next slide? If there's anybody who has any questions with regard to my voice breaking or something, just please reach out to Priyanka or Jatin. I wouldn't be seeing the chats while speaking. Yeah. So importance
Sanjana,
of
it's perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine.
Okay.
And to the participants today, just don't draw on the screen. So like, I think some question mark and some funny stuff is being drawn on the screen actively. So just don't do that. It's yeah. Thank you. Yeah, please, Sanjana, go ahead.
So importance of due diligence to a company. Now, when I say to a company, what I basically mean is to the founders and the company who's going through the exercise of being diligenced, right? Like I mentioned, the first point is identify non-compliances. As a company and promoter, it's very important for you to know what is non-compliant, so that at a later point of time, when your investor comes in and negotiates with you, you're prepared to quite an extent. Because, a lot of your findings in the legal due diligence are tackled in something what you call as your investment agreement, which you will have to sign with your investor. So if you're not mentally prepared on how to negotiate, typically you'll end up giving so many indemnities and so many undertakings and so many representations to your investor, which are very, very onerous, right? So at the outset, it's always better to have your own report also in place. It does not have to be a very long report. It can be a short compliance report that your legal person can prepare and give you, so that you're mentally prepared that, okay, these are few things that we should have done. We've not done it. No worries. Now, out of the legal findings, there could be two things. Either there could be issues that you can rectify, or there could be issues that possibly you can't rectify. Say, for instance, there's been a transfer of shares in your company and you've not executed the share transfer forms. Now, that is something that you can do at this point of time, because you only need to get share transfer forms, get the transferor, transferee to sign, and you need to stamp them. Those are internal documents. Or say, for instance, you don't have HR related policies. Those are something that you can create. Say, for instance, you don't have good employment contracts. You've just signed a random employment contract. That can be regularized. But say for instance, there are more serious non-compliances, like say for instance, something related to the RBI, that you had to compound, but you've not compounded. You've received a foreign investment from a NRI, you've not filed FCGPR. That is you may have to go to RBI and seek condonation of delay, or you may have to seek permission to file the form in a delayed fashion and by paying extra money. Those are more serious non-compliances. So when you know what the non-compliances are, you can either resolve them internally, or then you can, accordingly speak to your investor and say, hey, see, these are some larger ticket issues that we've identified. Let's speak on what we need to do, with respect to them. Right? Understand how to approach the next round of investment. Like I mentioned, if you already have an investor sitting on board, and you are looking at another investment, and your investor says, I need to do a full legal DD, and the period between the investment is not too much, the first and the second investment, why do you want to go through the entire process of again going through what your first investor has already done? So then you request your second investor that no, there's only going to be a top-up due diligence and nothing else. And accordingly, you also know how to negotiate in the second investment agreement. Limit your time to closing of an investment. Very, very important. One very important procedural thing I want to highlight here is that your investment from an investor does not come the moment you sign the investment documents. The procedure is that you will first sign a term sheet. After signing the term sheet, you will basically have an entire process of the legal due diligence that will happen. Once the legal due diligence is completed, then there will be certain key findings that the investor would have realized that, okay, there's some non-compliances that the company is, not done. So let's rectify those, and then I'll put in the money. So the reason why, if you do your compliance check from the outset, you have time to rectify those compliances, as a result of which your time between execution of investment document and closing of the investment, that is the investor remitting the money, becomes much more lesser. I have also worked on investments where the documents have been signed 6 months, and for 6 months, a company has just sat down and rectified all non-compliances, because they would have not complied with HR policies, they would not have filed returns, they would not have gotten EPF registration, ESIC registration. And this is not more from a default perspective. Sometimes companies are just unaware of these compliances, right? Like, how many of us actually, if you have your own companies, how many of you actually have a POSH policy? How many of you actually have a ICC, an internal complaints committee? How many of you have an equal opportunity policy? How many of you have an HR handbook? Not many, right? But these are issues that come out in your diligence, which you will have to rectify before the investor puts the money. So therefore, if you know these issues beforehand, you can rectify them beforehand, as a result of which the investor will put in the money faster. Second is, this is more secondary, I think, assess the performance of your employees. You could have compliance related officers, company secretaries, etc., who are, as a part of your organization. But say, for instance, you find non-compliances with respect to secretarial standards, or your agreements are not stamped, your agreements don't have basic provisions like confidentiality, IP, non-compete, non-solicit. At least then you know that you need to have a conversation with your employees to understand why is there so many non-compliances, why are there so many findings in the legal DD report. Right? So that also helps you assess, the answerability of all your employees and how they're performing. One other thing, though, I want to highlight is, just because your investor does a legal due diligence on your entity, that by itself does not mean that your liability as a promoter finishes. It does not matter that your investor has conducted a due diligence. If there is a non-compliance, which the investor knows as a result of him doing a legal due diligence on your company, you are still liable for it. At no point of time can you actually stand up and say, hey, listen, you knew about it before you did the investment, right? You had done a legal duty. So please be very prepared that almost all your investment agreements will have a clause to basically say that even though the investor has conducted a legal due diligence, you still continue to be liable to the investor if he faces any losses as a result of any non-compliances of the company. So please, whenever you have a legal DD, please do not think that you're giving the information of the company so your liability finished. It does not. There are ways to work around your liability in an investment agreement, and that may be a topic for a separate discussion. But by far, just providing, assisting and facilitating the legal duty does not at all mean that your liability is extinguished. Okay.
Okay.
So,
So, Sanjana, we have some questions,
sure.
and so like in order to cater that, so for a startup which is a two-founder company,
Hmm.
let's say one permanent employee and three interns, like
Okay.
working from a co-working space and having a business potential that at this point they are also ready to go international.
Okay.
So what are the compliances that and so one is actually doing the compliances, and the previous step is like understanding like what exactly needs to be done. So what is the right way for such a company, what are the right practices to follow in order to make sure that they are compliant and they're ready to be get funded?
Yeah, so I think one is definitely we would need to speak about what the company does in terms of business to understand what are the requirements in terms of compliances, and especially with regard to do they need to obtain registration under any statutes, etc. That may be one. Another approach is also to have a very some things may actually not be required by statute, but some things you do as a good corporate governance measure. So I think in that case, what I was planning to touch upon that towards the latter half of the presentation, but
Okay.
it's also important to have a compliance report in place, like I mentioned, and that's definitely something we can help. If this is a question raised by anybody on the group, this is definitely something we can help you with. uh, our coordinates are there towards the end. My personal coordinates are there as well. You can reach me on that and we can have a discussion.
Great, great. So I encourage everyone to maybe during the end maybe ask more questions relevant to it, or get in touch with Sanjana on one-on-one. So as like whatever way you guys feel comfortable. So yeah. So Sanjana, yeah,
Yeah.
please do it.
So yes, so the next one is for an investor. Very, very important. See, it's also, while it says importance of a due diligence for an investor, it's important for a promoter to know why it's important for an investor, because accordingly, then you negotiate correctly. See, the trick to negotiate with an investor is to always put yourself in his shoes and then make arguments accordingly. So why does an investor do a legal due diligence? One is, of course, to ascertain key risks and liabilities. Correct? Now, okay, the risks and liabilities are asserted. Now what? So therefore, based on whatever risks and liabilities that the investor identifies, there are multitudes of approach that will be taken in terms of documentation. One is representations and warranties. Say, for instance, your investor comes out and says, you should have obtained registration under this particular act. Why didn't you? It's a non-compliance. And you believe that, no, this registration is actually not required for me because maybe I don't fall under the threshold. Maybe I don't maybe I don't fall within a threshold. Maybe my number of employees are less. Maybe my, like for EPF, you need to have a minimum payment amount. All of that is not, I don't need the registration. But then in that case, your investor may say, okay, no problem. You please give me a representation in writing in the document that this does not apply to you. Now, this is important because in every investment document, if there is a breach, or rather your inability to comply with, or if there is a misrepresentation as far as any reps and warranties that you as a company and founder give, you are liable to make the investor good for any loss that he incurs. That is essentially called an indemnity. So let's understand the concept of an indemnity. Indemnity is basically, you will put the investor in the same place as though the loss never occurred. Right? So say, for instance, you tell the investor, no, I don't need registration under EPF. Tomorrow, for some reason, the EPF people come behind you and there is a fine on you, for instance. The investor's shareholding value is also impacted as a result of such fine. If there is any loss that is caused to him as a result of any financial loss to the company because you didn't get that EPF registration, you have to not only pay the fines and penalties to the EPF people because you didn't get the registration, you will also have to indemnify the investor for any actual losses that he suffers. Okay, that is called an indemnity. So that is why reps and warranties and indemnities are linked, because as a company and as a founder who's representing to the investor, if there is a breach or anything is not correct in your reps and warranties, you will have to pay to the investor for any losses. CPs versus CS. CPs are nothing but conditions precedent and conditions subsequent. Basically, the idea being that post your legal due diligence, if there are any conditions that your investor believes are critical without which he doesn't wish to invest, he'll basically tell you, I'll sign the document, you finish these actions. Once you finish these actions only, I'll remit the money. Some may be not very critical. For instance, some could be just getting NDA signed, getting customer contracts executed, certain things like that. He may say, okay, no problem, I'll give the money, and you know what, just do it after my investment within a specified time period. But some things may be very critical in terms of, say for instance, you don't have employment agreements. Say for instance, there is some very critical business related agreements are not stamped. Say for instance, you're on lease for a period exceeding 11 months, it's not registered. So then what happens? Then your investor may say, no, this is critical, boss. You need to get this done before I put my money in. I'm not risking the money or any losses to it. So anything that needs to be done before the money comes in is a condition precedent. Anything that needs to be done by the company after the money comes in is a condition subsequent. So therefore, depending on the seriousness of the non-compliance is when the investor and the company debate this. It's usually negotiated. Obviously, as a company, I will always want many actions to be completed after the money comes in, because who wants to wait for completion till the money comes in? As an investor, I will obviously be very super cautious and say, no, I don't want to give the money, boss, till you don't complete it. So the lawyers typically have a huge debate over how serious it is, why it can be done later, why it should be done earlier, etc. Helps the investor understand the commercial viability. Obviously, some things are so deal breaking. Say, for instance, RBI related issues. I have worked on a lot of deals which basically fell through because the company got into reputational issues with maybe a statutory regulator like SEBI, or there were heavy compounding fines imposed by RBI, or their IP was challenged essentially. So it just helps the investor understand. Or there were so many cases that were filed against the promoters. Even sometimes when cases are filed against the promoters, even in the individual capacity, while it could just be a case filed and the court would not have given a decision, investors still believe that no, we don't want to be, we may not want to participate in this funding. So it helps the investor take a final call as to whether or not they want to proceed. Now, an investment DD versus an acquisition DD, right? So investment DD is basically where the investor is putting in money. Acquisition DD is basically where somebody is acquiring the complete shareholding from the founders or the sellers or whoever are the shareholders of the company. What is the critical difference? Well, fundamentally, you will look at everything in terms of how is the company, how non-compliant, how compliant, everything. One very important thing, if you're doing an acquisition, if you're somebody who's looking to buy predominant majority shares, or say for instance complete shares, right, from the shareholders, what you should do is look at the title of the shares that are being purchased. That is very, very important if it's an acquisition. Now, there are multiple ways to do that as well. One is that you tell your sellers, please go to income tax department. If there's, get me a section 281 certificate. Basically, the IT department will, by way of the certificate, say, okay, there are no tax claims or tax liens on these shares. These shares are not encumbered, or they can be transferred. They're freely transferable. Please transfer. Now, some sellers say, the trick with the section 281 certificate is that it takes so much time that because you have to get the certificate from the income tax department, in some cases it even takes 6 months. So then in those cases, what do you do? In those cases, if the acquirer and the sellers, the founders of the company, are people who know each other, and there's a lot of mutual trust and faith, there's something called as a certificate from a chartered accountant, where the chartered accountant will basically say, okay, the shares, he will give an undertaking that okay, the shares are freely transferable, there's no encumbrances, there's no tax lien, there's nothing, you can transfer. Generally, as an investor, I would never say please go with the CA certificate. Why? Because what will you do if the CA has made a mistake? You can't do anything. You cannot do anything, because the CA's liability is only towards the founder. Ultimately, your transaction gets, there's a risk of your transaction being declared void by the IT department. The entire shares, could be encumbered. The IT department could take a lien. So it's always better that at the outset, tell your sellers that, hey, listen, please get this section 281 certificate. That is in the case of an acquisition. In the case of an investment, obviously, you're not buying any shares, you're getting allotted shares by the company. So there's no question of this certificate. But it's important to understand critically what is the difference between the two diligence. Second, very, very important point. If you're buying shares in a company, majority shares in a company, I'm talking about, possibly 51% or, a large share, not something like 1 or 2%, right? A lot of contracts that the company has. It could be with customers, it could be with the bank, it could be with lenders, financial lenders, or other people who have lent money. A lot of them have something called a change in control clause, or change in management clause, or change in shareholding clause. That basically, if you're if basically the idea being that if you are undergoing any of these activities, that is change in management, change in shareholding, change in control, please come to us and take consent before you do it. If you don't, it's a contractual breach, right? So which is why your lawyers have to examine these material contracts very, very carefully. That may not be so relevant in an investment DD. While you will generally get an NOC from all your lenders, etc., it's not that critical. But in case of an acquisition, this becomes very, very critical. So therefore, I think these are predominantly, and also second, in case of an acquisition, if you're a company, say, who's in the pharma sector, you will have so many licenses from the drugs and cosmetics. You may have it under Contract Labor Act, you may have it under Factories Act, etc., right? Under all those licenses, also you're required to go back and get consent from those authorities before you effect a change in control, or a change in shareholding, or a change in management. And this is something that companies typically don't do and get into issues later. So that may not be the case in case of an investment, but in case of an acquisition, this becomes very, very relevant. So therefore, like I mentioned in the first slide, it's very important to know why are you doing this legal duty, because accordingly, you get prepped for the legal duty and you talk to your lawyers about what they need to look at fundamentally to get the legal due diligence done effectively, right? Adjustments or holdbacks to the investment amount. Now, adjustments or holdbacks to the investment amount is basically where sometimes your investor may say, okay, I know the company needs money, but there are all these non-compliances. So, what are we going to do about it? He may say, I'm going to give you a part of the money now. I'm going to hold back certain monies, maybe keep it in an escrow, maybe not. And once you complete these non-compliances, I'll put it later. So, they'll structure it in a tranched payment. It will not come in one go. Again, how can you counter this? By doing your own compliance check before, so that if there's anything that needs to get resolved, you can start taking action and not have your payment again being disbursed into tranches. It's very painful because if, say, for instance, you're not able to complete certain conditions for the second tranche, the payment stops. Your investor will say, you didn't complete it, too bad, sorry. And typically there are timelines set that, unless and until you complete these conditions before the specified date, only then I will invest, otherwise I will not. So the idea being that, please, if you're an entrepreneur and you're on this session, please try getting a compliance report. We can help you with that. You can reach out to me. I will put my coordinates on the chat. If not, and you're an investor who's looking to invest and you need a legal duty, you can again reach out. But please get this done more to understand what you're doing right and what you're not. Moving on, the next slide, please. Okay, sections of a due diligence report. What do we look at in a due diligence report, in a legal due diligence report? Very important. So that, it's always better when as a founder and an entrepreneur, you're apprised of basically what it is that goes into a legal due diligence. So these are the various sections that you can see on the screen that are covered in a legal due diligence. Corporate share capital, employment and labor, material contracts, IP, insurance. So what do we deal with in corporate? Is it that we only check the issued share capital? Is it that we only, just look at share transfers? No. This is a very detailed study. If we look at the board minutes, we understand there are certain diligences where we go so intricately to even examine secretarial standards. IO board minutes signed, IO board minutes dated, how are they maintained in file form? Are they loose leaf? How, there's certain very intricate details like that. More importantly, we understand, are there any share transfers? Are the share transfers signed, stamped? Has the board taken on record the share transfers? What are the corporate policies looking like? Right? So if you're a listed company or you're a public company who exceeds certain thresholds, do you have committees in place? Do you have those requisite policies in place? Risk management policy, a CSR policy, etc., etc. So every particular detail like that. Share capital, very important. Maybe not so much in an investment DD, but in an acquisition. Basically, since the incorporation, your lawyer needs to trace the history of share capital. What are the share transfers? Are they being done legally? What is the present shareholding? So you basically start off from the time of incorporation and then you go up till the present date. And then you trace any changes in the share capital and then see, are there any allotments that were made to the shareholders? Were the requisite filings done with the ROC? What if your shareholders were non-residents? Were requisite filings made with the RBI? If you have any shareholders who are non-residents, are you filing that annual return on liabilities and assets? Every intricate detail like that is covered in your corporate and shareholder share capital chapter. Employment and labor. Again, very important because people actually undermine. I've seen a lot of companies undermine this section quite a bit. While people get EPF, ESIC, and that's about it. POSH policy, it will just be a very random policy. It will not comply with the acts. If your policies don't comply with your relevant acts, there's no point. If your leave policy is not in accordance with your shops and establishment point, then you might as well not have it, because even if you have the leave policy and it's not compliant with your shops and establishment act, then you are anyways non-compliant with the law. It will not help that you have a policy, or if you have maternity benefit provisions which are outdated, then you might as well not have that because you are anyways non-compliant. So the idea is not to have policies in place. The idea is to have policies which are compliant with law, right? Again, depending on how many employees you have, are you filing the returns correctly? Like say, for instance, under the Anti-Sexual Harassment Act, you're supposed to file annual returns with the district collector, right? So are you filing those? So those are the kind of things that we typically examine in your employment and labor. How are your employment? How are you working? Do you have permanent employees? Do you then have employment contracts? What are the provisions of those employment contracts? Are you working with consultants? Do you have consultant contracts? Are those contracts stamped? Are you working with contract labor? If you're working with contract labor, the person through who you have engaged contract labor, does he have the license under contract labor?
Hey, mute yourself, please. Yeah. Sorry,
So,
Sanjana.
no problem. Then there's material contracts. Material contracts, again, very important. See, sometimes, again, I work with a lot of companies, sometimes on a case-to-case basis, and sometimes also on sometimes on a case-to-case basis, and sometimes also on a retainer, and sometimes I review all their contracts. And before I started review, I'm told that founders basically signed off on a lot of contracts just looking at the commercial. Please understand that is not the way. I think if the pandemic has taught us something, it is that all companies need to be very, very clear about what contracts they are signing. You would have read how a simple clause like a force majeure clause has actually gotten companies out of so many financial liabilities, which would have otherwise become so compromising for them had the clauses not been drafted correctly. Right? So therefore, it's very important to have these contracts. As a company, what obligations are you taking on? Can you perform them? If you don't perform them, what are the indemnities you're providing? What are your responsibilities for breach? How are you terminating? Do you even have a right to terminate the agreement? Are you providing the other party a unilateral right to terminate the agreement? Sometimes companies have signed off on exclusivity clauses and are still providing services to same services to other partners, but without regard that they have signed an exclusive agreement. So I'm saying those are the various things that you kind of need to make sure and have your legal vet. So it's not something as simple as just signing off and saying, okay, the commercials seem fine, so it's fine. It's really not. It's better to invest that kind of time and energy and have somebody who can review your contract so your company doesn't get into issues later on. Licenses and registrations, again, very important. Licenses and registrations, depending on what is the area of your work, what is the scope of your business activities, that is the time that we will be able to tell you, okay, these are the licenses and registrations that you need, right? So again, that is dependent on what your business is, how many employees you have, etc. IP. Now, many of you, I don't deal exclusively with patents. I do a lot of trademark work, copyright work, and domain name disputes. So is your domain name even registered? Are there other people who are using your domain name? See, when other people use a domain name which is similar to yours, there's a lot of traffic which goes through their website. So especially if they're in the same sector as you. Not many people know, but there's actually a forum called National Internet Exchange of India, through which you can go and file a complaint if you have somebody who, if you have somebody who basically would using the same domain name for similar services. So the idea being that these are the kind of things that we would cover under your particular IP chapter. If you have a trademark, is it registered? Which stage is it in? Is there a lapse? somewhere, why are you not getting the registration if it's been that long? So I'm saying that, you know, there are multiple things that we look at in terms of IP. Insurance is a very standard chapter. In some states, basically, you need to have insurance if you're providing gratuity. It's a requirement under the Gratuity Act. But otherwise, typically nowadays, companies are more or less, you know, for their own benefit, there are insurances which are there. So I think, you know, you can, I don't think that that is very critical, because I have never faced an issue with a company who's not been insured. Financial indebtedness, I think from an investment perspective, the only thing that you need to make sure is that you get the NOC from your lender with respect to getting any investment. That's very, very important. Please keep your lender in the loop if you're talking to an investor, because under your sanction letters, there will invariably be something to say that you need to have permission if there is any increase in your issued and paid up share capital, which will obviously happen when you have an investor on board, because you're issuing additional shares, your issued capital will increase. So yeah, that's the sections of a due diligence report. The next slide, please. Yeah, so how is the report? Like I said, the report is prepared once you reviewed all the documents and information. The first step is, of course, we need anybody who's conducting the legal due diligence, whether on behalf of the company or the investor. If you don't give us the information, you're not transparent with the information, we can't prepare the report correctly. And I think you should never be scared about any you know, accepted non-compliances. You should just go with an open mind to whoever's doing your legal duty and just say, this is all the information. Not only do you tell me what are my non-compliances, please tell me how to resolve them, because it's not enough for the person to just tell you this is wrong. They also have to figure out a way to help you. Certain non-compliances, your legal person may not be able to do much, too bad. But otherwise, in most cases, the job is not just to tell you this is wrong. The job is also to tell you what needs to be done to rectify. Again,
Sanjana, we have some questions coming in. So do you want to take them now, or like should we take it towards the end of the presentation?
Sure.
Okay.
We can take it now. I'm just
Okay,
looking at that too.
Okay, so we have some questions from the investor sides and the startup side as well. So for a really early stage startup, like what is the minimum? So like they're asking like what is the minimum due diligence they can get away with?
I'm sorry, could you just repeat that?
For a very early stage startup,
yeah,
what is the minimum due diligence they can get away with, like in a funding round, and like before the funding round as well, like what are the due diligence that minimum that they should follow, and for that, like what are the costs associated with, you know, with these activities that a startup should consider?
See, of course, the costs are something that I can't comment on. It depends on who's doing your legal due diligence. You know, your cost can range anywhere between 25,000 to even 2 lakhs, depending on who's doing it. So that's something. What are the basic minimum legal compliances that you should follow? Please have employment agreements in place. Please have consultant agreements in place. If you have more than you know, X number of employees, 10 employees, including a woman, please get your POSH policy in place. Please have your HR handbook in place. Please make sure that whenever you sign agreements with customers, please make sure that they are vetted by legal. I can't stress enough on it. Please make sure your contracts are vetted. Please do not sign off on anything, because if you're lucky, nothing will happen. But if you're not one of the lucky ones, there's a lot that can go wrong. So these are the basic things that you need. Of course, as your startup you know, progresses and you hire more and more people, there are bound to be more compliances. You know, as you grow, so do the compliances, and so does the cost of maintaining those compliances. I'm also going to, for everyone's benefit, going to be putting my name and personal email address here, and you can please you can reach out to me on this if you have anything that you would like to speak on further.
And Sanjana, we have a question from the investor side.
Sure.
So like being a US citizen, Tejas is asking, so being a US citizen, how he can look forward to invest in an Indian company? And what are the minimum documents which are required, you know, for a new firm, or like, and also in case of an acquisition?
Okay, so how would you invest in the company? Of course, you will have to determine whether you will invest in the capacity of whether you will invest in preferred shares or in equity shares. I think at a term sheet level, that will all get resolved. But you can of course invest even as an individual. It does not have to necessarily be through an entity. You can also have, of course, there will be RBI related compliances because you're a non-resident. You will have to file, your company will have to file form FCGPR, and after that there are regular reporting requirements to the RBI in the form of annual return on liabilities and assets. So that is something procedurally that you will have to do. Are there any restrictions? One important thing, depends what is the sector of the company you're investing in. Under the FDI policy, that is your foreign direct investment policy, there are certain sectors in which foreign direct investment is permitted for anything, 100%. You don't have to go to RBI for approval. In certain sectors, it's not 100%. Beyond a specified limit, you have to go to RBI for approval, right? That could be defense or communications, etc. So it depends on what is the sector. IT, for a fact, I know there is no approval. E-commerce, there is no approval that you need from RBI. So that's why you need to there are a host of compliances depending on what is the company that you own. But of course, standard compliances are reporting requirements to RBI, which the company has to do, not you per se.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So it's very case to case basis, and depending on like what is exactly happening and what is also the stage of the, let's say, the startup, and also the ticket size. So how does it, so it keeps on changing with that.
Correct.
Okay. So yeah, so I think so pretty much. So if so like people, if participants have more questions, they can keep putting in the messages box.
Yeah, I've also left my name and number here, so you can also, Anju, you can reach out to me. You can reach out to me on this. My number is 8939264762, and that's my email address. So you can also reach out to me on that. Should I continue with the presentation? If there's no other questions?
Yes, we have covered everything. Yeah.
So executive summary. Like I said, it's a part of an issue-based report. As a founder and investor, you don't really care how, see, I think the exercise is no founder or investor cares what they're compliant with. The issue is what they're not compliant with. Therefore, please save time, please save cost. Tell your legal person from the outset itself that I want an issue-based report. I don't want a full-fledged report of everything that you have seen, right? So it basically an executive summary will be the high level key issues. It will give you a quick overpoint of the key points that you need to talk about and discuss in order for you to, which actually need resolution. Then you have the main report. The main report will be a little more detailed for you to basically go through and read if you need more clarity on what the issues are, right? The schedules are basically, again, nowadays, nobody does it, but in the earlier times, like maybe 3-4 years back when I was doing legal due diligences, companies said we want each and every contract that we have signed summarized. Why they wanted it was because they didn't want to read a 20-page contract when they could read a 3-page summary. So that's the reason they did it. But nowadays, companies don't do it. The reason for that being that it leads to a lot of added costs. See, please understand, due diligences, the costs are in, the legal person will charge in 2 ways, either on a per hour basis or a fixed lump sum. If you go for a fixed lump sum, typically the cost is very high unless and until you're doing the legal DD through a known person, or you're doing it from a community like ours where, there is a mutual give and take and the aim is to help everyone. But if you go to if you're going elsewhere to a person who you don't know, to a complete professional setup, the costs are high, right? So if you go and say, please summarize these documents as well, etc., most likely they will say we will charge on a per hour basis. So how important are those summaries to you? You understand the scope of the DD, what you want in the DD. Before going and asking the legal person, do my DD, you understand what you want to see in the report and then do, because accordingly your legal person will take the diligence further. Okay, I think there was one question here. What was the average time period? Okay, so again, for instance, the legal duty is being conducted for 3 years. Say, for instance, your company is incorporated in 2005 and you want a legal due diligence right from the inception. That can take a very long time and is practically not feasible. The recommendation is always, even for an investment, please do the legal duty for the past 5 years. If you're doing an acquisition, however, the share capital table can be traced from the inception. It's a must. But otherwise, if it's purely an investment, you don't have to really do it right from the inception. You can do it 5 years from now. Say I'm helping one of you do a legal DD. I will look at documents only from 2015. So, that will help me at certain things to quite an extent. But if it's an acquisition where I'm representing somebody who's acquiring shares in the company, I will want to look at the share capital from the beginning. So it can go anywhere between a month to maybe even 3 months, depending on what the scope and the tenure of the deal is. Okay, there's another question from Mr. Balaji. Sorry for asking it. Would there be a difference in the report if the startup is an early stage and it is proprietary or a collaboration? In case of a team or startup, founders should have vetted share agreement before starting the due diligence. So yes, of course, if it's an early stage startup, the legal duty will differ because it's an early stage startup. The company has not been in existence for very long. But having said that, depends on how many employees you have also. Say even as an early stage startup, you have 20 employees. There are a lot of compliances that you need to be aware of and be compliant with. So I think that depends not just on whether it is early stage, but also on the traction of your activities and the how are you picking up pace in the market, how many clients you have, how many agreements are you signing, etc. In case of a team of startup founders, should we have vetted share agreement before starting the due diligence? Not really. Usually in an investment, everything happens in parallel. The due diligence happens in parallel and the investment agreements get finalized in parallel. The findings of a legal due diligence ultimately have to be covered in the share agreement, right? That is the purpose. So it is important that whoever is doing your legal due diligence works as per timelines, because without those findings being incorporated in the agreement, there's no point of those findings. So that's important.
So Sanjana, so there's one question regarding, like, if there is a mistake while doing it like the first time, can those mistakes be revoked? Like, can you do something about it like later on?
How do we handle the mistakes done earlier and can't be rectified or difficult to do it? Depends on what the mistake is. Depends on what the non-compliance is. That is something that you can always take offline and see what is the non-compliance that we're talking about. Usually we try and figure out what is the best way. If there is no way to do it, unfortunately your investor will ask for an indemnity and you may be compelled to give it. Having said that, there are very few non-compliances which you can't do much about. So we'll have to examine that and see on a case-to-case basis.
So we have one more question, like, who pay for the due diligence?
Again, very negotiated. This one is very interesting. In some cases, the early stage startups say we don't want to pay. I mean, if we have to pay for due diligence, why are we asking for investment? But in some cases where the startup actually has picked up traction in the market, the investors say, no, you pay subject to a cap. So say, for instance, your lawyer takes 2 lakh rupees, the investor will say, okay, you pay 1 lakh, I'll pay 1 lakh. Or you pay 50,000, I'll pay the balance. But in some cases, the startup takes the cost entirely. So again, that is negotiated between you and your investor. If you're doing the compliance report to rectify things on your own accord, right? As a vendor compliance report, because you want to set things right in the company, of course, the company will have to pay it, in which case you go to somebody who's price effective.
Okay.
Mr. Ezilin had a question. When is the best time to do a legal due diligence? In a pre-seed stage. I think you can do it at any point of time before you go to an investor. You can actually, it's very, very professional to actually go to an investor, especially at a Series A stage. Maybe at a seed stage, the investor may or may not ask you, but at a Series A stage, if you go and tell the investor, I've done my duty and this is, what I have, it is seem to be very professional, because one, the investor takes you seriously, that you are serious about compliances. It's not just business plan. It's also that your investor knows that, okay, you're being compliant. This is also important for you. It shows a good sense of corporate governance ethics. So you can do it at any stage. Early seed, I think, depends on how many employees. Like I said, what's your traction? You can do it at any point of time.
So so Shruti is asking, so my startup is in service sector of manufacturing industry, where manufacturers are associated as vendor to us. So how should we keep our legal term in concern of seeking investment from the VCs in the future?
Okay, so manufacturers are associated as vendors, that is, manufacturers are providing services to you, basically. So how do you keep your legal terms with them? Please have something, what you call, all your terms should be at arm's length. Please have signed contracts with them, because if these manufacturers are people who are providing services to you and then you are further providing services, your investors will always want to know that you have contracts with them, because there'll be liabilities in case there's a consumer dispute later on, right? Then if the consumer dispute comes on the company and you're not able to put it on the manufacturer, it's a huge problem for not just you, but also for the investor. So you need to have your agreements in place for that, appropriately putting liability on your manufacturers for any consumer related disputes. Also, how would you, how seeking investment from VCs in the future? I think generally it would not matter that much if you're in the manufacturing sector, etc. Generally, for all companies, it is that please have, like Mr. Tejas is being saying, please have solid contracts. Exactly. What if they stop delivery? Not just stop delivery, but also say, for instance, they give you a product that you have sold later on, and there is a consumer dispute. Say, for instance, they are manufacturing eatables, and you have distributed them, and tomorrow somebody, God forbid, something happens. Who's going to take liability for that? If you don't have contracts for that, those are the larger, what we call in legal term, product liability claims, right? So defect liability, all of those things are very common things you will see in manufacturing agreements. So how then do you tackle all of that? So your contracts have to be very airtight.
So we will take more questions towards the end of it. And yeah, so maybe we can go ahead with the presentation, and then we can keep on taking the questions towards the end.
Yeah, I think Mr. Ezelin has a question, that is the due diligence same if a US investor comes in the form of an individual or an LLP? It doesn't matter, because ultimately he will want to know what is wrong with the company, how non-compliant you are. An investment is an investment. How you get it in, whether through an individual or through an LLP or through a partnership or through a private limited, those are structuring forms. That by itself does not take away your liability. So that is immaterial. It's going to be the same. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Okay, how can we help you? One is definitely we can help you in preparing a compliance report. If you're an entrepreneur and a founder, or not just a compliance report, if you need help from us, I think by now we've kind of discussed what are the important things you need in terms of contracts, how important it is to have airtight contracts, and how important it is to have somebody review your compliances. If you would generally like us to help you do a compliance check, we can definitely do that. If you would like help in terms of documentation with your customers, or even with respect to your investment agreements with your investors, signing your term sheet to end-to-end closing, that's again something we can help you with. Not only can we help you identify the issues, we can also do our best to help you resolve issues. I think when you go with a compliance report and you're aware of what's wrong, what are the non-compliances with the startup, I think it gives a very good sense even to an investor. It gives a lot more confidence, because it shows the investor that you're aware of what's wrong and you're willing to make it right, as opposed to an investor telling you, hey, listen, this is this is wrong, and as a founder you're just oblivious to it. So of course we can help you prepare a vendor due diligence report. We can help you just do a general compliance report. We can help you with your investment docs or with your contracts, depending on what your requirement is. You can go to the first slide. This is actually my number, so you can actually call me on this if you feel that you need any kind of help with respect to if you feel you need any kind of help with respect to a legal due diligence or a compliance check. And I should tell you, it's not uncommon, sorry, for companies to do these compliance reports. I have been doing them off late for a lot of entities who have set up subsidiaries in India. And sometimes what happens is that you are an overseas entity and have a subsidiary in India, and when you raise capital in the overseas entity, your investor also wants to make sure that your subsidiary is performing well. So in those cases also, it's you can consider getting a compliance report. So, that's also again something that you can consider doing. Of course, if you're somebody who's at a term sheet level with an investor, or if you're an investor in this session who's looking to invest, please feel free to reach out. We can always help you with that as well.
Okay. So we will take a few more questions. So if anybody wants to, ask Sanjana any question, you can raise your hand, or you can, put
I think
it in
Mr.
the chat.
Siddharth has a question that most VC firms have an in-house legal team. One second, I think. Thank you everyone for saying that it was a helpful session. I think that's the intent, and I'm so glad, being able to share inputs and opinions. Most VC firms have an in-house compliance team. Can the VC incline the startup to conduct the process through their own team? They will have an in-house compliance team, though I'm very doubtful if they do the legal due diligence, because I have never seen a VC do a legal due diligence through an in-house team. Usually they are external lawyers who are engaged by the VC. As a founder, I think it's always important to have your own lawyer negotiate, because you can have one lawyer who's negotiating, for the investor and the promoter. I find it not very useful for the promoter, because typically the investor always has a superior thing and he says, I'm investing, so my way or the highway. Whereas when you have your own legal person, your legal person fights for you tooth and nail. That's all I can say. I mean, I have done that for a lot of founders. I have represented to the extent of, sometimes it gets even unpleasant. VC says, no, we'll call it off. But the founders always, it's better as the founder to have your own legal person on board. Somebody who will not be neutral, but more inclined towards you. Because if you have somebody who is more inclined towards you, the chances that your perspective in the document is also covered in a much, in a more proportionate manner. That's why.
Sanjana, in the whole process, so there are different stakeholders. Like there is investor, there is the founders of the company. Then there are chartered accountants, there are merchants. We need valuation reports, and so so as a whole, like how complicated it is as a process, like from the very beginning to the moment the money is transferred into your account.
So I think the process is time consuming. It is definitely not an easy process. You sign a term sheet with an investor. After that, there's a legal due diligence, which typically takes about a month and a half if you're on very strict timelines. The second thing, of course, is that then your documents are, like I said, should always be negotiated in parallel. Please don't wait for your legal duty to be completed, because then those findings will be appropriately covered by way of your representations and indemnities, etc. So that can always be done. And I think secondly, you can also, I think the whole process takes anywhere between 2 to 5 months, depending on how fast your investor progresses and how fast even your legal teams work, how fast the investor's legal team works.
So 2 to 5 months is a long time. And so
Yes.
in that, so there is some conflict of interest regarding some clauses, and, there are certain compliances which are which the startup need to be compliant from the ground up. So for a very, very early stage startup, so how has been your experience with, from
Then
how?
it takes fairly less time. It doesn't take a lot of time, to be very honest. It takes
Mm-hmm.
about anywhere between 1 to 1.5 months
Mm-hmm.
if we all work as per timelines. And even 1 month, people complete an investment if you're an early stage startup.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a question from Mr. Tanumay, I think. If a company buys any third-party services, then which section of legal? So what are the third-party services you're buying? Is it IP? Are they goods? Are you further selling them? Then, you again, like I said, contracts has to be your key, your key area of focus. So it depends on what are the services that you're buying and, how important those services, are you commercializing those services again?
Okay.
Ma'am, I have one question.
Sure.
Yeah, actually, my company is just a newly registered startup company, just 2 months back. So I want to transfer my share to another person. So what's the procedural way to
Nothing. You can do a share transfer form if your shares are not in DMAT. Please do a share transfer form. Please make sure that you stamp it correctly, and your board needs to take on record the shares. You need to have a board resolution where they take on record.
I think it is not in DMAT. I think it's in MOA. It is just mentioned 10% to Party A and other 90% is for Part B. So that's all. So for that, just need to fill the form and then submit to the RO. Hello.
To who you're transferring the shares, is that person a resident?
Yeah, resident.
If it's a resident, no problem. You can when it's purely an ROC issue, you can file the share transfer forms, keep them internally, and secondly, the board needs to take on record that the shares have been transferred.
Okay, thank you.
So Siddharth has a very interesting question. So he's asking, given the pandemic, can the whole process be conducted remotely in a seamless manner?
Yes, it can definitely. In fact, I have just completed a compliance report where everything was done electronically. Of course, there's a little challenge in terms of the company uploading documents on a data room, but with I think speedier communication, as long as communication is not broken, it can definitely be done remotely. There's no in fact not just the pandemic, even pre the pandemic, nobody was doing a diligence from the office of the company. The company typically creates a Google Drive wherein all documents are uploaded and then they're reviewed.
And with the strong digital backbone that the government processes has, like I think it's really helping out like all the startup in these situations.
Correct.
Okay. So I think that is all. So thank you everyone for joining us today. And for any queries, any questions, if you want to seek further help on any specific case of yours, any problem that you're stuck with that you need an opinion with, so you can get in touch with Sanjana. Sanjana would love to help you out with your specific issues. And so we'll be conducting some future sessions with Sanjana as well. And from the Indian startup side, we request you to if you want to volunteer, want to become a speaker at the platform, if you want to become a more integral part of the Indian startup community, please get in touch with us. We'll really love to talk to you guys. And thank you all for today's session. It was a really interesting session. So Sanjana, you want to give any closing remarks before we wrap up?
I mean, nothing as such. I think we've covered everything in the session, but I do encourage people to be more cognizant of their contracts. This is something I can't stress enough, only because of the numerous issues in the past 5 months that I have dealt with. And also, if a minimal fee is something that you're willing to spend in these pandemic times, which I understand is difficult, please get a compliance report done just to understand what is applicable, what is not, and how compliant are you. It will always help you as a corporate. If whether you're pre-seed, early stage, it doesn't matter. The only reason for that being, at some point, if your aim is to raise investments, it's always nice to know where you're going wrong and how to rectify it. Things that can be identified earlier can be rectified more easily.
Okay. Thank you, Sanjana. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this today's session. So as they say, investor and a startup relationship is like you're getting married to an investor. And I think due diligence is like one of the most important steps before that marriage. So let's get it right. And if you have any issues, just get in touch with us. Thank you, everyone.
Just one thing here. I think, Shruti, you've asked, can you please address the other question? Again, Manik has a question. I think there was also a couple of other people who had other questions. I think Vivek has a question.
So Shruti also has like one related to her company. So she's saying my startup was earlier known as Proton Steel Building and now known as like a different name.
Okay.
So they changed their company's name. And so what are the things that they should take care of in order to that compliant and everything is good?
So of course, if it's possible, Shruti, can we connect offline so that we can discuss this a little more in detail? We'll have to see a little bit on the contractual front, what are the restrictions in terms of name change, if any, and also on your regulations, also on any licenses that you may hold, which need you to notify any authority. So maybe we can take this offline, given that it's more specific to your startup.
So also Suresh has a question so he had an issue with RBI investment compliance. And so it was not being done for some reason. So can you help with that area of?
Sure. Suresh, you can connect with me. My number is here. You can give me a call. We can speak and we can understand what the issue is and how we can tackle it better.
So I think, Sanjana, we have covered pretty much everything. So if anybody has any quick question you want to ask us, please. Sanjana, there are like 1 or 2 questions regarding businesses related to third-party services.
Okay.
So like, which section of due diligence covers that? If a company
Right, so
buys,
that's what I said, correct, that you're buying third-party services. So what are the services that you're buying? That becomes important. How are you commercializing it? That again becomes important. When you say you're buying services, especially that becomes tricky when it's software, because is it an assignment or is it a license? Again, that is something that we need to understand. So you can again reach out to me offline and we can do this. Mr. Syed has a question, can our CA do all the DD? So I mean, I would think that your CA should definitely do the financial diligence, because that's not something that a legal due diligence person will be able to do. I don't think it's advisable for the CA to do the legal due diligence, because your CA is well versed in the financial aspects. Of course, there are a lot of CAs who also, who are also lawyers, in which case that's a exception. But if your chartered accountant is purely a chartered accountant, the niche is only financial expertise. So therefore, they may not be apprised of various changes in the laws or various new laws that have come out, because even as a part of your CA syllabus, you don't study laws the way you study in a LLB degree. So therefore, it's always advisable to go to a lawyer. Of course, if your CA is also a lawyer, then that's a different issue. Then you can always have your CA also.
Hi Sanjana, this is Praveena here. Can you hear
Hi.
me?
Yes, I can hear you, Praveena.
Okay. I have a query. See, I have a company, or it's a very recent company. The first project which I'm in discussion with, I'm not sure whether I'll get it, but then I'm discussing on something with the firm or with the international party who is trying to do a POC on similar lines on which my company has been launched.
Okay.
Is it okay if I have the first client as an international client? Do I get into any trouble of is there anything which is related to foreign investments and stuff like that which will affect me, or how do I go about it?
No, we'll have to look at the contract a little more carefully, because how are the payments being made? I mean, if their client is remitting money from overseas, shouldn't be a problem. But it's okay. There's no hard and fast rule that you need to have only a resident client. It's fine if you have an international client. But until and unless, please, my suggestion is that please sign an NDA until and unless you have a definitive agreement, like a services agreement or a supply agreement, whatever you're executing with them. Because ultimately, even in the course of discussions, you end up giving a lot of you can end up giving a lot of confidential information. So that sometimes becomes tricky, because there have been some cases where you've disclosed some confidential information, and then either they implement it on their own, or they possibly go to a competitor, get better pricing using the confidential information you've given. That also happens practically. So it's always better to have an NDA signed with them, with any customer. This is not just for you, Praveena, but for everybody on the forum here. Please have an NDA signed with anybody who you plan on having a prospective business relationship.
Thank you, Sanjana. That was very helpful. I never thought from that perspective.
Thanks, Praveena.
I think it also helps in like to have a better communication as well, because both the parties also understand like at least some part of that legalities is done and information can be shared like honestly.
All right, guys. There is one announcement, Jatin and Sanjana, if you allow me. So we have an event link being posted on the chat where people can schedule their meetings with the legal attorney. So if those who wanted to talk more and have personal questions one-on-one, please go ahead and schedule a 30-minute session. Some of them are free. We may have a little more later, but if we are able to allocate some time, we will definitely try to get you some free consultations with the legal attorney. You can look at the link that has been provided there. Yep, that's my announcement there.
Okay, everyone. So any other questions that you have, please feel free to call me and we can chat about it. It's been a pleasure, everyone. Thank you so much for being such a good audience. Good evening, and all of you, hope you have a good evening going forward. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you everyone. Thank you, Sanjana. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.